What if the most glorious moment in the history of faith never happened? What if the waters remained still, firm, impassable? What if 2 million Israelites had been trapped between the most powerful army of the ancient world and a sea that didn't open? Have you ever imagined what the world would be like today if that miracle, that spectacular parting of the Red Sea waters, simply hadn't occurred? Welcome to the channel, and if you want to explore the deepest questions that transform our understanding of history and faith, subscribe now, because what you're about to discover today will completely change your perspective on the past, present, and even the future of humanity. Today, we're diving into an impossible question that reveals possible truths. What would happen if the Israelites had never crossed the Red Sea? We're not just talking about an alternative historical event. We're talking about the complete transformation of 3 world religions, the redefinition of the concept of miracle, the rewriting of Western history, and how you understand divine power at this very moment. To understand what never happened, we first need to comprehend what did happen. The Israelites, enslaved for generations in Egypt, finally won their freedom after 10 devastating plagues that broke Pharaoh's will. They left en masse, an entire nation in motion, carrying centuries of memory, pain, and hope. But freedom was fragile, temporary, conditional upon what would come next. And then came the moment. Pharaoh changed his mind. His war chariots, his elite troops, his trained archers pursued that unarmed people, exhausted, vulnerable. The Israelites reached the Red Sea, and there, with water ahead and death behind, there was no escape, no military strategy, no escape route, only growing panic and the terrible realization that perhaps freedom was just a cruel illusion. But don't forget this moment, because we're going to return to it with a completely different perspective, one that no one has considered until now. Keep watching. In that historic instant, according to the biblical account, Moses stretched out his staff and the waters parted. The liquid walls rose up, the seabed became dry land, and 2 million people crossed to salvation, while the Egyptian army drowned in the returning waters. It was the definitive miracle, undeniable divine intervention, the moment that would forever define how the world understood God's power. But now, imagine, just for a moment, that this didn't happen. Imagine that the waters remained exactly as they were, calm, indifferent, immobile. Imagine Moses with his staff outstretched, the people waiting, the minutes passing, and nothing changing. What would happen in that moment and in the thousands of years that followed? If you're beginning to perceive the magnitude of this question, leave a comment now saying alternate world, because very few people truly understand how a single event can rewrite all of human history. First, we need to consider the immediate fate of the Israelites. Without the miracle, 3 scenarios emerge with brutal clarity. In the first, most likely, the Egyptian army catches up with them and massacre is inevitable. An entire nation is destroyed before it even begins to exist. There is no Israel, no Judah, no 12 tribes. History simply ends there, on that beach, with the sound of swords and screams being muffled by indifferent waves. In the second scenario, more complex, a desperate negotiation occurs. Perhaps the Israelites surrender, return to slavery, accept even more severe conditions. They survive, but as a broken people, defeated, without a narrative of redemption. Their identity would not be forged in conquered freedom, but in the humiliation of forced return. How would this shape their collective psychology? How would this transform their relationship with the divine? And there's a third scenario, fascinating and rarely considered, the exodus by the long route. Without the miraculous crossing, Moses would have to lead the people by an alternative path, perhaps northward, circumventing natural barriers, facing additional years in the desert. They would survive, but through human perseverance, strategy, prolonged suffering. The Exodus would not be a 40-year story, but perhaps 60, 80 years. Entire generations would be born and die on the journey, never knowing either Egypt nor Canaan, only the eternal desert. Now stop and think. How would this transform not just the history of the Israelites, but your understanding of faith? Because this answer is directly connected to what you believe about purpose and divine intervention. And we're going to explore this now in a way that will challenge everything. The absence of the Red Sea miracle wouldn't just eliminate one event. It would eliminate the fundamental paradigm of how three major religions understand God's nature. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which together represent more than half of the world's current population, would have their theological foundations completely reconfigured. In Judaism, the Red Sea isn't just an inspiring story, it's the definitive demonstration that Yahweh is the God of impossibilities, who controls nature, history, and destiny. Without this miracle, on what basis would Jewish identity be built? Perhaps on survival through resilience, gradual liberation through generations, the concept of a God who works through slow time and human effort instead of spectacular interventions. This isn't necessarily inferior, it's radically different. It's a theology of divine patience instead of a theology of immediate divine power. And Christianity? The entire Christian narrative rests on miracles that validate divine identity. Jesus walking on water, multiplying loaves, raising the dead, and finally resurrecting himself. But these miracles are interpreted within a tradition that begins at the Red Sea. If the foundational paradigm changes, if God never parted the waters, then the expectation of supernatural intervention changes completely. Perhaps Christianity would develop as a philosophy of gradual transformation, emphasizing ethical teachings and moral evolution instead of supernatural events. The resurrection itself could be understood metaphorically as spiritual renewal instead of physical resurgence. If you're realizing that this isn't just alternate history, but deep reflection on what you truly believe, comment now, "This changed my perspective," because the next point goes even deeper. Islam, which honors Moses as one of the greatest prophets, would also be transformed. The Quran repeatedly mentions the Red Sea miracle as a sign of divine truth and power. Without this event, Islamic prophetic emphasis could focus more on direct revelations, transmitted words, divine knowledge communicated through messengers, rather than physical demonstrations of power. This wouldn't necessarily weaken faith, but would completely reorient it. But the implications don't stop at theology. They traverse all subsequent history with devastating force. Consider the Roman period. Rome conquered Judea, but encountered a people united by a powerful narrative of liberation and divine intervention. This people resisted fiercely because they believed the same God who parted the Red Sea could defeat Rome. Without this foundational narrative, would Jewish resistance have the same fervor? Would the revolt of 66 to 70 CE have happened the same way? And what about the rise of early Christianity? The first Christians were Jews who reinterpreted their scriptures through the lens of Christ. They connected Jesus to the Exodus, to Passover, to liberation. Without the Red Sea miracle, all this typology collapses. Paul of Tarsus wouldn't have the same theological reference points. The book of Hebrews couldn't compare Jesus to Moses in the same way. Christianity might never have separated completely from Judaism, remaining as a philosophical sect instead of becoming a world religion. Follow this line of reasoning with me. Without a robust, independent Christianity, Constantine would never adopt it as the religion of the Roman Empire. Without this imperial conversion, all of Europe would develop differently. There would be no Christian Middle Ages, no Crusades, no Protestant Reformation, no colonization of the Americas under Christian banners. The very geopolitical configuration of the modern world would be unrecognizable. And you need to stay until the end, because the conclusion will connect all of this to your personal life in a way you never imagined. But perhaps the most profound transformation wouldn't be historical or religious, but philosophical. The existence of the Red Sea miracle established a standard. God acts dramatically, visibly, undeniably. But what if the divine message had been different from the beginning? What if God had always operated through slow, progressive, almost imperceptible processes? Imagine a theology where faith isn't rewarded with spectacle, but with endurance, where liberation doesn't come in a glorious moment, but through decades of persistent struggle, where the miracle isn't the parting of waters, but the human capacity to keep walking when everything seems impossible. Would this be a more mature faith, more realistic, or simply different? This perspective completely transforms how we understand suffering and providence. If God didn't part the Red Sea, perhaps because the lesson wasn't about immediate divine power, but about partnership between human effort and divine purpose. Perhaps true liberation isn't being rescued from impossible circumstances, but finding strength to traverse difficult circumstances. And here's the question you need to answer for yourself, not for me, not in the comments, but in your own conscience. Do you prefer a God of spectacular miracles or a God of gradual transformations? Your answer reveals more about your own faith journey than any historical analysis could. So we return to the beach, to the still waters, to the desperate people, and we realize the question was never really about what would happen if the miracle didn't occur. The question was always about what the miracle means, why we need it, how it shapes our understanding of divinity, history, and possibility. The Red Sea parted, and with it, history divided between before and after, between slavery and freedom, between despair and hope. But in exploring the world where this didn't happen, we discover something equally powerful, that faith doesn't depend only on spectacle, that liberation has many forms, that God can be found both in the storm and in the calm, both in the miracle and in perseverance. Your journey of understanding doesn't end here, it's only beginning. If you want to continue exploring the profound questions that transform how we see history, faith, and meaning, subscribe now, because this content isn't for everyone. It's only for those who aren't afraid to question, to explore, to go beyond easy answers. Turn on notifications, because the next video will explore another historical impossibility that will challenge everything you think you know. And comment now which historical event you want to see reimagined, because your participation builds this channel, and together we are creating something no one else is doing on the internet. Don't miss this opportunity to be part of a community that thinks differently. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, keep questioning.